The reports of my death in 1910 turned out to be true. I don't remember a thing about it. The last thing I remember in 1910 was lying in my bed in Stormfield, my estate near Redding, Connecticut, reading a book by Carlyle about the French Revolution. The next thing that I was aware of, I was lying on my back in a meadow. The sun was shining on my eyelids, which awakened me, and I looked about me and I recognized the place. It was Corey Farm outside of Elmira, New York. I stood up, saw some people in the distance, and walked over and approached them, and eventually they convinced me that it was the year 2017. How did I get from Redding, Connecticut to Elmira, New York, a distance of over 200 miles, and lose a century plus 7 years in the process? Where had I been during that long intervening stretch of years? Was it heaven or was it hell? I don't recall playing a harp, nor negotiating with the gatekeeper about my entrance, nor do I recall sending back to Yuma for my blankets. It's too many for me, never mind, let it go. I would like to know, though, how old am I? Am I 184 years old? I was born in 1835 in Florida, Missouri, that is. Now it's 2019, or, as I appeared to be in a state of suspended animation there for that 67 years, could I say I'm still in my mid-70s? What you are probably wondering about, though, is why am I dressed like this? When I first set foot on the lecture platform in San Francisco, California in 1866, I wore a black suit. And I continued in that vein for several decades after that. Anytime I appeared in public, in a formal setting, I wore a black suit. Not that I was overly fond of that somber color, but it was the law. Whenever a man appeared in public, on the platform, in some formal setting, he must wear a black suit. Well, not the law exactly, but it was custom, and custom supersedes law. Custom is stronger than other forms of law. But when I reached the biblical summit of 70 years of age, I discarded those chains, I threw them off myself, and I began to wear a white suit. This was shocking to people. They considered me eccentric, to say the least, to wear a white suit in public, especially in the wintertime. But I didn't mind being shocking, stirring people up, being conspicuous. In fact, I would like to read to you a passage from my book, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. You may or may not be aware that the characters in my books, especially The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, were drawn from life. The characters are based on people I knew, people I grew up with. For example, Aunt Polly was my mother. Mary was my sister Pamela. Sid was my brother Henry. Laura Hawkins was the basis and inspiration for Becky Thatcher, Tom Blankenship, Huckleberry Finn. Now, Tom Sawyer himself, he was built to the composite order of architecture, and it took 3 boys in the village of Hannibal to make him up. Well, actually, I should admit it took 4 men, 4 young boys to be Tom Sawyer. And maybe you'll see a connection between myself and this character, Tom Sawyer, as I read this passage from that book. Tom joined the new order of cadets of temperance, being attracted by the showy character of their regalia. He promised to abstain from smoking, chewing, and profanity as long as he remained a member. Now he found out a new thing, namely that to promise not to do a thing is the surest way in the world to make a body want to go and do that very thing. Tom soon found himself tormented with a desire to drink and swear. The desire grew to be so intense that nothing but the hope of a chance to display himself in his red sash kept him from withdrawing from the order. 4th of July was coming, but he soon gave it up before he had worn his shackles over 48 hours, and fixed his hopes upon old Judge Fraser, Justice of the Peace, who was apparently on his deathbed and would have a big public funeral since he was so high an official. During 3 days, Tom was deeply concerned about the judge's condition and hungry for news of it. Sometimes his hopes ran high, so high that he would venture to get out his regalia and practice before the looking-glass. But the judge had a most discouraging way of fluctuating. At last he was pronounced upon the mend, and then convalescent. Tom was disgusted, and felt a sense of injury, too. He handed in his resignation at once, and that night the judge suffered a relapse and died. Tom resolved that he would never trust a man like that again. The funeral was a fine thing. The cadets paraded in a style calculated to kill the late member with envy. Tom Sawyer liked to stir people up and be conspicuous, and I was the same way. In fact, if I was to wear a white suit today, rather than shock people, it would soothe them and make them feel nostalgic. I'm not here to soothe people. I'm not here to make people feel nostalgic. Now as to this in particular. In the summer of 1895, I embarked on a lecture tour of the world for charity, my creditors. I visited some halls in the United States, then on to the Sandwich Islands, or tried to, Hawaii you call it, Australia, New Zealand, Tasmania, Ceylon, now called Sri Lanka, India, South Africa, England. Now, India is a very fascinating country to me, the only foreign country that I often daydream about and deeply long to return to. Fascinating not just for its architecture, such as the Taj Mahal, not just for its quaint customs and unusual rites and ceremonies and beliefs, but the way people dress. Not just the women, but the men too, dress in extravagant, flamboyant, bright colors. Hence, you see this Indian Sherwani that I'm wearing along with my Captain Stormfield belt. Well, that may answer a couple questions you may have had. it may raise a couple questions. Now, that's all right, because in the next part of the performance, I will talk about some prophecies I made in the first part of my life, from 1835 to 1910, such as the telectrophonoscope, where I was very prescient, and I basically foresaw the invention of the television and the internet. On the other hand, the telephone. I used the telephone. However, I did not think it would catch on or become popular with the masses or businesses. I considered it more a curiosity, a sort of a toy. So I missed fire on that one. And then we'll talk about questions people have about my first part of my life from 1835 to 1910, and my present life from 2017 until now, and the connection between the two, and the similarities and the differences. In a nutshell, the differences are basically the technology that we have now in the year 2019. The similarities is human nature. Human nature never changes. So, as to the telectrophonoscope,